Levi Morgan woke to the pain. It was not the nightmare, though that had been present. 2. The familiar dream of cannon smoke so thick it choked the sun and the high, thin sound of a man calling for his mother. No, this was the physical pain. The long, ropey scar that ran from his collarbone down his ribs, pulled tight in the dark. Pre-dawn cold of his ranch house. It was a saber cut, earned at Shiloh from a Confederate boy who probably had not learned to shave. It always ached when the temperature dropped. And the temperature was dropping. Winter was closing on Delmore, Montana, like a fist. 1887, another year almost gone. He swung his legs out of the narrow cot, his bare feet hitting the freezing floorboards. He did not bother with a lamp. He knew the layout of the small, 3-room house by heart. He had built it himself, sinking every post, planing every board, with an eye toward a life that had never materialized. Now, it was just a shell, a place to keep the wind out. In the main room, he stirred the embers in the cast-iron stove, added 2 split logs, and worked the bellows until a weak flame caught. He set the coffee pot on to boil, the water already laced with yesterday's grounds. Waste not. He pulled on his stiff denim trousers and a wool shirt. His movements economical. Levi was a man pared down to essentials. He was 38 years old, but the war and the decades since had carved lines into his face that made him look closer to 50. His hair was dark, unruly, his eyes the color of gunmetal. He moved with a stillness, a coiled tension that made his few neighbors keep their distance. The ranch was quiet, just the lowing of the half-dozen cattle he kept in the barn, and the whistle of the wind through the lodgepole pines. He had come here after the betrayal, after the war, after everything. He had come here to be alone. He drank his coffee black and bitter, standing by the single window, watching the sky lighten from charcoal to a bruised purple. It was Sunday. He had no use for God, but he needed supplies. The town was unavoidable. An hour later, he rode his bay mare into Delmore. The town was little more than a single muddy street carved into the prairie, bracketed by a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and the stark white steeple of the Presbyterian church. The bell was ringing, calling the faithful. Levi ignored it, tying his horse to the hitching post outside Thompson's Mercantile. He had his list: flour, salt, coffee, ammunition. He did not make it to the door. Morgan, a word. Mayor Thompson stepped off the boardwalk, flanked by Pastor Allen and Mrs. Gable, a woman whose face looked perpetually pursed, as if she'd just tasted sour milk. Levi kept his hand away from the pistol on his hip, but only just. He hated being cornered. Mayor, we've a situation. Levi, Thompson said, rubbing his gloved hands together. He was a small, fussy man who owned the bank and most of the town's mortgages. A matter of Christian charity. I'm not a charitable man, Levi said. His voice was rough, like stones dragging. We are aware, Pastor Allen said, his tone slick. But you are a man with space, a large house, empty save for yourself. Levi's eyes narrowed. Get to it. It's the Hensley woman. Mrs. Gable cut in, her voice a sharp whisper. Maggie, Margaret Hensley. Levi's mind sifted the name. He'd heard the talk. A family on the outskirts. Their claim burned out 2 weeks ago. A fire in the night. The father, Silas, and his 2 grown sons had vanished. Some said they fled their debts. Some said worse. She's alone. Thompson said, destitute. The church has been housing her in the rectory storeroom, but it's not suitable. Winter is here. And she's difficult. Mrs. Gable added, peculiar. She barely speaks, and at her age, 35, unmarried, an old maid. It's unnatural. What's it to me? Levi asked, the cold biting at his cheeks. We need you to take her in. Morgan, the mayor said, dropping the pretense. Just for the winter. You're the only bachelor with a proper homestead and no wife to object. Levi felt a cold fury rise in him. They saw his empty house, his solitary life, and saw a resource to be plundered, a place to dump their unwanted. No. The word was flat, final. Now, see here, Thompson sputtered. It's your duty as part of this community. I ain't part of this community. I trade here, that's all. Levi, the pastor said, trying a softer approach. The woman is damaged. She's lost everything. Surely your heart isn't so hardened by the war that you'd let her freeze? Levi's hand twitched. He hated the mention of the war. He hated their smug, pious faces. He hated their assumptions. He was about to tell them, in no uncertain terms, where they could place their charity. He turned to mount his horse, ready to leave, supplies or no, and that is when he saw her. The church doors had opened, the service letting out. The townsfolk spilled onto the steps, bundled in dark wool, their breath pluming. She stood apart from them, on the bottom step, as if a quarantine line had been drawn around her. She was tall, painfully thin, dressed in a faded calico dress that was wholly inadequate for the weather. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but stray strands whipped across her face in the wind. She was not looking at the crowd. She was looking at the dirt. Levi stopped. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the name, Maggie Hensley. It wasn't the story of the fire. It was her face. He knew that face. He had not seen it in 10 years. It was older, gaunt. The youthful softness had been scoured away, leaving only the fine, strong bones beneath. The exhaustion was so deep it looked like a stain under her skin. But it was her. She must have felt his stare. Her head lifted slowly. Her eyes, a pale, flat gray, swept past the mayor, past the pastor, and locked onto his. Recognition was instant. It was not a flicker. It was a physical blow. Levi saw it in her eyes. The shock, the sudden, raw memory, and something else, a deep, abiding shame that mirrored his own. Kansas, 1877, a barn loft, the sound of a summer thunderstorm. The blood drained from Levi's face. He felt the eyes of the mayor and the pastor on him, watching this silent, charged exchange. The past had just walked onto the church steps, a ghost in worn-out boots. Fine, Levi said. The word was torn from his throat. The mayor blinked. Fine, you'll take her. Levi could not look away from her. She was still staring at him, her expression unreadable now. Frozen. I'll take her, he said. He felt trapped. By what? He wasn't sure. The town, the past, the look in her eyes. A collective sigh of relief went through the small group. They had solved their problem. They had unloaded the town's burden onto the one man who wouldn't, or couldn't, complain. Mrs. Gable scurried over and spoke to her. Maggie nodded once, her movement stiff. She picked up a small, battered carpet bag from the step, her only possession. She walked toward him. She did not look at the mayor or the pastor. She did not look at the gossiping townsfolk who were now watching, whispering behind their hands. She walked right up to his horse. She stopped, her chin held high, but he could see the tremor running through her. Pride, and an exhaustion so total it was a miracle she was still standing. Mr. Morgan, she said. Her voice was low and cracked with disuse, but it was clear. I thank you for the lodging. I will not be a burden. I will earn my keep. I don't need a hired hand. Miss Hensley. You are getting one, she said. There was no room for argument in her tone. I will stay, just until the thaw. Levi looked up at the sky. The clouds were low and heavy, the color of iron. The first hard flakes of snow, sharp as needles, began to spit from the sky. The thaw, he repeated, the words tasting like ash. Winter hasn't even begun. Even so, she said. He untied his horse, grabbed her bag, and stowed it. He gestured to the wagon he'd brought, hitched nearby. "Get in." She climbed into the wagon bed, settling herself on a sack of feed, pulling her thin shawl tight. She did not ask to ride up front. He did not offer. He got his supplies, the transaction with Thompson now curt and silent. He loaded the flour and salt, he mounted his mare, tied her lead to the wagon, and took the driver's seat. He snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, leaving the church and the staring faces of Delmore behind. The 5-mile ride to his ranch was brutal. The wind howled, carrying the snow horizontally. Neither of them spoke. The silence in the wagon was a living thing, a cold, heavy presence that sat between them. Levi kept his eyes fixed on the trail, his shoulders hunched. He could feel her behind him. He did not have to look. He could feel her presence like an itch under his skin. 10 years. He had thought that night was buried under battlefields and blood, and the long, empty years he had spent building his isolation. And now, here she was, Margaret. He had never even known her last name. When they reached the ranch, the world was already fading into a swirl of white. He pulled the wagon into the barn, the sudden quiet and warmth of the animals a sharp relief. He unhitched the team. She climbed down, stiffly. "The house is there," he grunted, jerking his chin. "Go inside. Stove is lit." She nodded once and, clutching her shawl, made a run for the house. He watched her go, a thin, dark shape against the snow. He took his time with the horses, rubbing them down, giving them extra feed. He was delaying. He was a coward. He'd been a coward 10 years ago, and he was a coward now. Finally, he could delay no longer. He grabbed his supplies and her small bag and went inside. The house was cold. The 2 logs he'd added hours ago were nearly gone. She was standing by the stove, her back to him, trying to soak up the last of the heat. He dropped the sacks by the pantry. He put her bag on the floor. "It's cold," she said, not turning. "It's Montana. It'll get colder." He moved to the stove, opened the grate, and began expertly laying new wood. The house was small. The main room served as kitchen, dining room, and his own living space. His cot was in one corner. A crude table and 2 chairs were in the center. A door led to the only other room. "You can take the bedroom," he said, his back to her. She finally turned. "Where will you sleep?" "Here," he gestured to the cot. "That's your room? I can sleep here, by the fire." "I said, you take the bedroom." His voice was sharper than he intended. She flinched. He saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of her shoulders. He cursed himself internally. "Fine," she whispered. He pointed. "In there. Linens are in the chest." He watched her walk to the door and open it. He saw her pause. The room was clean, stark, a simple bed frame with a mattress, a wooden rocking chair he'd built one winter, and a large, beautifully carved cedar chest. He had built the room for a wife. He had carved the chest for her. He had waited. But after the war, after the betrayal that had sent him running from his old life, no wife had come. He had not wanted one. The room had sat empty for 6 years. Maggie looked at the room, then back at him. He could not read her expression. "Thank you," she said, and closed the door. Levi stood in the middle of his kitchen, the wind rattling the windows. He was alone again, but he was not. She was 10 feet away, behind a thin wooden door. He sat at the table, but he did not eat. He did not light the lamp. He just sat in the growing dark as the blizzard descended. He could not sleep. He lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the wind a high-pitched scream. It was the same sound. Kansas, 1877. He had been 28. He was drifting, running from the memories of the war. He was hard, angry, and hollowed out. He'd taken shelter from a summer thunderstorm in a public stable. He thought he was alone. She was in the loft, hiding. She had been 25. She was traveling with her family. She'd said they were camped outside town. She'd come in for supplies and got caught in the rain. They talked. He did not remember what they talked about. The rain, the war, the future. He remembered her voice was soft, and she laughed. It had been years since he'd heard a woman laugh without calculation. Then the lightning flashed, a great, crackling boom that shook the barn. She'd startled, a small cry. He'd reached for her, just to steady her. It wasn't a seduction. It was combustion. It was two people, lonely and lost, finding a moment of raw, desperate heat in the dark. He remembered the smell of hay and rain. He remembered the shocking, velvet feel of her skin. He remembered the way she'd clung to him, her silence more intimate than any words. He had woken before dawn. The storm had passed. The air was cool and clean. He looked at her, asleep in the hay, her face soft, unguarded, and the shame hit him like a physical blow. He was an animal, a monster carved by the war. He had taken the one clean thing he'd found and soiled it. He dressed in the dark. He slipped out of the barn without a sound. He saddled his horse and rode west. He did not look back. For 10 years, he had carried that night as another of his secret sins, another piece of proof that he was damaged beyond repair. And now she was sleeping in the room meant for his wife. The wind howled. The house groaned under the weight of the snow. He must have drifted off. He awoke with a start. The dream was on him again. The barn, her face, but when he reached for her, she turned to ash, slipping through his fingers, and he was left clutching the cold, muddy uniform of the boy he'd watched die at Shiloh. He sat up, his heart pounding. The house was ice cold. The fire in the stove was dead. He heard a sound, a floorboard. He looked across the room. She was there, Maggie. She was not in the bedroom. She was sitting on the floor, directly in front of the stove, huddled in her thin blanket. The wind was rattling the stovepipe, and she was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. She was awake. Her eyes were wide, staring at the cold iron of the stove. She had been having her own nightmares. She looked up as he rose from the cot. Fear flashed in her eyes. The fear a woman has of a man in a dark, cold house. The fear of a woman who remembers what that man is capable of. He stopped. He saw her as she was. Not a memory, not a ghost, a freezing, terrified woman. He did not speak. He walked past her, his bare feet numb on the floor. He pulled on his boots. He grabbed the wood box. He went to the door, unbarred it, and stepped out into the screaming white hell of the blizzard. The wind tore at him, stealing his breath. He fought his way to the woodpile, buried under 2 feet of snow, and filled the box. He staggered back, his beard already caked in ice. He slammed the door, the sound rattling the cabin. She had not moved. She was just watching him. He knelt at the stove. His hands were numb, clumsy. He laid the kindling. He used the last of the embers, blowing on them until his lungs burned. A tiny flame caught. He fed it, slowly, meticulously. He rebuilt the fire. The stove began to tick as it heated. A small, precious circle of warmth began to press back against the cold. He stood. He looked at her, still huddled on the floor, her shivering unabated. He turned, walked to his cot. He grabbed his own blanket, the heavy wool one that had seen him through 6 winters. He walked back to her. He did not say a word. He unfurled it and dropped it over her shoulders. She gasped, a small, choked sound. Her hands came up and clutched the thick wool, pulling it tight. Levi turned away. He went to the stove, grabbed the coffee pot, and poured the bitter, cold dregs into a tin mug. He set it on the stove to heat. When it was steaming, he poured a second mug. He walked over to her. He crouched, handing her the hot mug. Her freezing fingers brushed his. She took it. She held it in both hands, letting the heat soak into her palms. He sat on the floor, on the other side of the stove, with his own mug. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the blizzard raged, trying to tear the world apart. Inside, in the small, dark room, two people sat by a growing fire. A silent truce settled between them. The thaw was a long, long way off. The truce of that first night settled over the cabin like the snow itself, cold, deep, and absolute. The blizzard had buried them, cutting them off from Delmore, from the world, from everything but each other and the howling wind. When the sky finally cleared 3 days later, revealing a world of blinding white, Maggie was up before him. Levi awoke to the sound of scraping. He found her outside, his own coat dwarfing her thin frame, wielding a shovel almost as tall as she was. She was trying to dig a path to the barn, her movements jerky and inefficient, but fueled by a desperate energy. "What in God's name are you doing?" he barked. She startled, nearly falling into the drift. "The animals." "I'll see to the animals. Get inside." "I will earn my keep, Mr. Morgan," she said, her breath pluming. She was shivering, but her eyes were defiant. "You'll earn pneumonia. Go!" She held her ground for a moment, a small, fierce thing swallowed by the vast, frozen landscape. Then she stabbed the shovel into the snowbank and stalked back inside. But she did not stop. When he returned from the barn, his fingers numb, he found her mending one of his shirts. The stitches were tiny, perfect and tight, as if she were sewing her anger into the fabric. She insisted on cooking, though his supplies were meager. She scrubbed the floorboards until they were pale. She mended his blankets. She worked with a grim, silent intensity that began to wear on his nerves. She was not just earning her keep. She was trying to scrub away her own past, or maybe just the shame of her presence in his house. He found her one afternoon at the woodpile, swinging his heavy axe. She was clumsy, and the blade glanced off the frozen log, dangerously close to her shin. Levi crossed the yard in 3 strides and snatched the axe from her grasp. "Are you trying to kill yourself?" "I am trying to be useful," she cried, her voice cracking with frustration. Her hands were raw, the knuckles split and bleeding. "You're too thin for this work. You'll break." "I do not break," she whispered, staring at the wood. "Get inside," he said, his voice softer this time. He was worried. She was running on some fuel he could not name, and he knew it would not last. Weeks passed. The cold deepened. The short days were marked by the routines of survival, feeding the stock, checking the fences, keeping the stove fed. The long nights were marked by silence. When he had to ride to Delmore for more flour and salt, she announced she was coming. "No," he said. "I am not your prisoner, Levi." She had started using his first name, though it still sounded sharp on her tongue. "You're better off here. I need thread and soap." He knew it was an excuse. He relented, hating himself for it. The wagon ride was tense, the silence between them brittle. Delmore was a mistake. The town had been stewing. As they walked toward the mercantile, he saw the curtains twitch, Mrs. Gable sweeping her own porch, stop dead, her mouth falling open. The whispers followed them like stray dogs. "There she is, the Hensley woman, living in sin with him, shameless. Heard she's unnatural. That fire wasn't an accident. She's cursed." Levi felt Maggie's back go ramrod straight. She kept her eyes forward, her face a pale mask. Inside Thompson's store, the pot-bellied stove radiated heat, but the air was arctic. 3 ranchers were there, and they all fell silent, turning to stare. Jebediah Smith, a drunkard who warmed the bench by the stove, spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Well, looky here. Morgan's finally got himself a housekeeper. Or is it a bed warmer?" Levi moved so fast he seemed to teleport. He grabbed Jebediah by the collar of his filthy shirt and lifted him half off the bench. Levi's eyes were the color of a frozen lake. "Say that again," he said, his voice a low vibration. "Easy, Morgan, easy," Jebediah squeaked, his eyes wide with terror. "Just town talk, no harm meant." Levi shoved him back down. "Keep your talk to yourself." He paid for his supplies. His movements clipped. He grabbed Maggie's arm. "We're leaving." She did not speak the whole ride back. The snow had begun to fall again. Soft, lazy flakes that covered the ugly tracks of their wagon. As he unhitched the team, he finally broke the silence. "You're not to go into town alone, you hear me?" She stood by the wagon, her face turned away. "Why? Are you afraid they'll taint your reputation?" "Damn my reputation," he snarled, throwing the harness onto a peg. "I won't have them laying hands on you." She looked at him then, her expression unreadable. "You're protecting me." "I'm protecting my property. You're under my roof. That makes you my concern." It was a gruff, clumsy lie, and they both knew it. He was shielding her, and the realization sat awkwardly between them. The new blizzard hit that night. It was a monster, a white hurricane that screamed down from the north. For 3 days, they were trapped. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin. The wind was so loud they had to shout to be heard. On the 3rd night, the wood in the box by the stove ran low. Levi was on the roof, fighting to shovel the crushing weight of the snow off before it caved in. When he finally came back inside, half frozen and exhausted, he saw the wood box was empty, and Maggie was gone. His coat was missing from its peg. A dread, colder than the ice on his beard, seized his heart. He grabbed his heaviest gloves and plunged back into the storm. "Maggie!" He could barely see 5 feet. The snow was a churning, white wall. He followed the faint depression of her tracks, already drifting over. They led toward the creek, where his main woodpile was stacked. He found her. She was in the water. The creek was mostly frozen, but the current ran fast in the middle. She must have slipped on the bank, or a log had rolled. She was clinging to the edge of the ice, her heavy skirts dragging her down, the shock of the cold having stolen her voice. He did not think. He threw himself onto his stomach, the ice cracking beneath him, and lunged, grabbing her wrists. "Hold on!" He pulled, his boots finding no purchase. He roared with the effort, the sound ripped away by the wind. He hauled her bodily from the water, dragging her onto the bank. She was a dead weight. Her clothes were already freezing solid. Her breathing was a shallow, rattling gasp. He scooped her into his arms. He was terrified. He had seen men die this way in the war. He ran, stumbling through the drifts, his lungs burning. He kicked the cabin door open and half fell inside. He dropped her on the rug before the stove. "Maggie!" Her eyes were half open, but vacant. He fumbled with the buttons on her coat, but his fingers were numb and her clothes were stiff with ice. He grabbed his hunting knife. He cut the laces of her bodice. He tore the frozen calico and wool from her body, the sound violent in the small room. Her skin was a terrifying, waxy blue. He threw her onto his narrow cot and piled every blanket in the house on top of her. It was not enough. Her shivers were not shivers. They were violent convulsions, the kind that came just before the end. He knew what he had to do. He had seen field medics do it. He stripped his own wet clothes off, his fingers fumbling with his buttons. He was shaking. He climbed into the narrow bed behind her, pulling her frozen body back against his bare chest. It was not sexual. It was desperate. It was the last, most primitive act of survival, one human body forcing its heat into another. He wrapped his arms and legs around her, caging her in, rubbing her back, her arms, her legs, trying to force the blood to move. "Don't you die!" he grated, his mouth against her frozen hair. "You hear me? You are not dying here. Don't you dare!" He held her for what felt like hours. The blizzard screamed. The fire in the stove crackled. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, her convulsions subsided. Her skin went from blue to white, then to a pale, blotchy pink. Her shivering became a normal shiver. She made a small, gasping sound, a whimper, and instinctively pressed back against his warmth. The panic in Levi's chest began to subside, and something else took its place. He was suddenly aware of every line of her, the curve of her hip pressed against his, the way her spine fit against his stomach, the softness of her breast against his arm. The air in the cot was hot, steamy, and smelled of wet wool and it was electric. He closed his eyes, a deep, burning shame washing over him. He was a monster, holding this half-dead woman and feeling this. He held her, rigid, until her breathing finally deepened into true sleep. She awoke late the next morning. She was warm, she was alive, and she was naked, pressed against Levi. She stiffened instantly, a gasp of pure fear. "You fell through the ice," he said, his voice a low rumble by her ear. He did not move, afraid any motion would terrify her more. "You were freezing to death. It was the only way." She relaxed, but only by a fraction. The silence stretched. "Levi?" she whispered. Her voice was raw. "I'm here. I never forgot that night, in Kansas." His breath hitched. He closed his eyes. "Neither did I, Maggie." "I never married," she said, her voice so quiet he could barely hear it over the wind. "After that, I couldn't, no one, I felt marked." He felt the words like a brand, marked by him. "I left," he confessed, the words torn from him, words he had never spoken. "I ran. I was a coward. The war, it broke something in me. I was no good. I saw you, and you were clean, and I'd ruined you. I thought I'd ruined you. So I ran." She was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, she turned in his arms. She had to shift, to move against him, and the contact seared them both. She was facing him, her gray eyes clear and searching. "You didn't ruin me, Levi," she whispered, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. "You were the only one who ever saw me. Before that, after that, I was just a daughter, an old maid. You saw me." The walls were not just cracked, they were gone. They stayed in the cot, talking. The blizzard, which had trapped them, had now set them free. A few nights later, the storm had tapered off to flurries. He brought out a bottle of whiskey he kept for medicine. "You're still chilled," he grunted. He poured 2 small measures into tin cups. She took hers, her eyes wary. She drank. She coughed, a raw sound that shook her thin frame, but a tiny, rusty smile touched her lips. "My father used to say this stuff could raise the dead," she said. "Mine, too." Levi took a drink. It burned a good path down. They talked about their families. She spoke of her brothers, her father, the fire, but her words were flat, as if she were speaking of strangers. So he spoke. He told her about his brother, Silas, how he'd been the bright one, the one who laughed, how he'd gone to war and come back hollow. "He wasn't right," Levi said, staring into his cup. He'd sit in the barn for hours, just watching the dust. Said he could still hear the cannons. One spring morning, I went out to feed the horses. He'd used his service pistol, put it right in his mouth. Levi's voice broke. He had not said those words aloud, ever. Tears streamed, hot and sudden, down his weathered face. He did not wipe them. He was too shocked by their presence. Maggie put her small, rough hand over his. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She did not offer empty comfort. She just held his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. The air in the cabin was different now. It was charged, thick with 10 years of unspoken things. His desire for her was a constant, raw ache. He watched the way she moved, the way her hair escaped its bun, the way her hands, now calloused and cracked, gripped her mending. He was ashamed of it. He felt like he was taking advantage of her presence, of her debt to him. One night, she was standing by the window, watching the moonlight on the endless snow. He came to stand behind her. He could smell the lye soap on her skin, the faint, clean scent of her hair. "Maggie?" She turned. He couldn't stop himself. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was a decade of guilt and loneliness, and the raw, stunning relief of her being alive in his arms. She stiffened. Then, for a heartbeat, she kissed him back. Her mouth was soft, hesitant. Then she shoved him away, hard. She was breathing hard, her eyes flashing in the dim light. "No!" He stumbled back, the shame cold and instant. "Maggie, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "Not if it's only guilt," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "Not if you're doing this because you think you owe me. Not because you feel sorry for the old maid. I won't be your penance, Levi. I won't be your absolution." She turned and fled into her room, the door clicking shut. He stood there, stunned. He had not even realized that was what he was doing. They did not speak for 2 days. The silence was worse than before. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, full of recrimination. He was sitting by the fire, his shirt off, mending a leather harness. The cabin was warm. He was acutely aware of his bare skin, of the long, ropey scar that ran from his collarbone down his ribs. He always kept it hidden. She came out of her room. He tensed, expecting her to say she was leaving, that she would rather freeze than stay. She stopped, her eyes fixed on his chest, on the scar. He froze, waiting for the revulsion, the pity. She did not speak. She walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. He stopped his work, his hands still. She reached out a single, trembling finger. She touched the top of the scar, where it disappeared under his beard. He sucked in a breath. He had not been touched there, not by anyone, not ever, except for the surgeon's saw. Her finger traced the scar, slowly, reverently, following its ugly, puckered path down his skin, over his ribs. Her touch was as light as a moth's wing. It was not pity, it was curiosity. It was a kind of reverence. Levi was shaking. He wanted to pull away, to cover himself, but he did not. He sat, rigid as stone, and let her touch him. He closed his eyes. She traced it all the way to its end, then pulled her hand back. She looked at his face for a long moment, then turned and went back to her room. The tension was a wire, pulled so taut it was humming. The next night, he heard her heating water on the stove. The large copper tub, usually stored in the shed, was by the fire. "I'm going to bathe," she said, her back to him. "Fine," he grunted, his eyes fixed on the fire. He tried to focus on his book, but the words blurred. She hung a blanket on a rope between the table and the wall, a poor, flimsy screen. He heard the water pour into the tub, the splash as she stepped in, the soft, rhythmic sounds of her washing. He smelled the soap. He could not read. He could not think. He just sat, his knuckles white on the arms of his chair. He saw her silhouette through the thin blanket, a shadow of movement. He heard her stand, the drip of water on the floor. He looked up. She had pushed the blanket aside. She was standing by the fire, wrapped in her own thin blanket, the one he had given her that first night. Her hair was down, damp and dark, falling over her shoulders. The firelight played on her skin, turning it the color of honey and gold. She was looking at him. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, terrified, and determined. He could not breathe. Slowly, her eyes locked on his. She let the blanket fall to the floor. The blanket pooled at her feet, a ring of soft wool on the rough floorboards. Levi did not move. He could not. The firelight played over her, illuminating the sharp angle of her collarbone, the pale curve of her stomach, the hollows of her hips. She was thin, too thin, but she was not frail. She was a willow switch, bent but not broken. She stood there, her hair unbound and damp, Her eyes locked on his. She was terrified. He could see the pulse beating in her throat, a frantic, trapped bird. But she did not move. She did not cover herself. This was her choice. A desperate gambit laid bare in the flickering light. His book fell from his lap, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The sound broke the spell. He stood. He was clumsy. His chair scraped back, loud and grating. He was a man made of rough edges, of scarred tissue and coiled anger, and he felt profoundly unequal to the moment. He took one step, then another. He stopped in front of her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin. He could smell the soap, and the rain, and the faint, clean scent of her that he remembered from a barn loft 10 years ago. He raised his hand, his fingers rough, calloused from the axe and the reins. He did not touch her skin. He touched her hair, brushing a damp strand back from her face. "Maggie," he whispered. It was a prayer. It was a curse. She flinched at his touch, but she did not pull away. Her eyes closed. That was all. That was the only surrender he needed. He bent and slid one arm beneath her knees, the other around her back, and lifted her. She was impossibly light. She made a small, broken sound, a gasp of air, and her arms went around his neck, clinging to him as if he were a spar in a flood. He carried her the few feet to his cot. He laid her down. The shadows were deep here, away from the fire. He looked at her, and the hunger that he had been fighting, burying, and denying for weeks, rose up and consumed him. It was a starving thing. He was clumsy, fumbling with the buttons of his own shirt, tearing one off in his haste. He came down beside her, onto her, and his mouth found hers. It was not gentle. It was a collision. It was 10 years of guilt, solitude, and nightmares. It was the raw, brutal shock of her, alive and warm and here. Her mouth opened under his, hesitant, then just as hungry. Her nails dug into his shoulders. This was not the practiced intimacy of a loving couple. It was two people falling off a cliff, grabbing onto each other on the way down. His hands were everywhere, relearning the shape of her, and she was meeting his desperation with her own. "I thought about you," he breathed against her skin, the words torn from a place he kept locked. "Every damned year, I'd see the thunderheads build up in the summer, and I'd think of you." She clung to him, her face buried in his neck. "I never thought," she whispered, her voice thick. "I never thought I would be wanted. Not again. Not like this." He covered her mouth with his, swallowing her words, and they fell into the fire. The next morning, Levi woke first. The light in the cabin was a cold, unforgiving gray. The fire in the stove was low, the embers barely glowing. He felt the warmth of her, a solid living thing pressed against his back. Her arm was thrown across his chest, her breathing deep and even. She was truly asleep. A sleep he had not seen from her. It was a sleep without nightmares. He looked at her hand, pale against the scarred, dark skin of his chest, and the guilt crashed down on him. It was a physical weight, heavier than the snow on his roof. What had he done? He had taken her despair, and her loneliness, and her vulnerability, and he had used it to feed his own. She was his captive, a woman forced on him by the town, trapped by the winter, with nowhere to go. And he had used her like a whore. He was no better than the men in town. He was worse, because he had wrapped his sin in the pretense of kindness. He felt sick. He was the monster he had always feared he was. Slowly, carefully, he slid out from under her arm. She stirred, murmuring something in her sleep, and pulled his pillow to her, burying her face in it. He dressed in the dark, his movements silent. He shoved his feet into his boots, grabbed his coat, and fled the cabin. The air outside was sharp as glass, a deep cold that burned his lungs. He welcomed it. He deserved it. He went to the barn, the squeak of his boots on the packed snow accusingly loud. He did not stop working for hours. He mucked the stalls. He reset a loose fence post, his hands burning with the cold. He split wood until his shoulders ached. He was punishing himself. When he finally returned to the cabin, the sun was high but weak. Maggie was up, dressed. The cabin was clean. Too clean. A pot of coffee was boiling on the stove. She did not look at him when he entered. "Morning," he grunted, pouring himself a cup. "Mr. Morgan," she replied. Mr. Morgan. The name was a slap. The warmth, the intimacy, the fragile truce. It was all gone. He had shattered it. He saw her from the corner of his eye. She was standing by the window, her back to him. She was rigid. She had put herself back together, the cracks cemented with shame. He had abandoned her again. First in the barn in Kansas, now in the cold morning light. He drank his coffee, the bitterness scalding his throat, and left again. He could not stand to be in the same room with his own guilt. Weeks passed. The thaw began, not as a single event, but as a slow, agonizing retreat of the cold. The snow melted from the roof, dripping day and night. The trails to town became a thick, impassable gumbo of mud. The silence in the cabin was a poison. They moved around each other like ghosts, their words limited to necessities. Wood is low. Flour is out. The tension was a wire, drawn so tight it hummed. Finally, the mud hardened enough. They had to go to Delmore. They were out of salt, out of coffee, out of everything. The ride was miserable. Levi stared at the horse's ears. Maggie stared at the muddy trail. Delmore was awake. The thaw had brought the town back to life. Levi pulled the wagon up to the mercantile. "I'll get the feed," he said. "You get the household goods." He wanted to separate. He could not stand being near her, seeing the accusations in her silence. "Fine," she said. He went to the feed store. She walked toward the mercantile. She never made it. Amos Fry, a thick-set man who was Jebediah Smith's closest friend, stumbled out of the saloon. He was drunk, even at 10 in the morning, and he saw Maggie. "Well, looky here," he bellowed, a grin splitting his beard. "It's the old witch. Come to town for more supplies." Maggie tried to walk around him. He blocked her path. "What's the matter, witch? Too good to talk to us? What's Morgan feeding you out there? Is it true he keeps you chained to the bed?" He was playing to the street. 2 other ranchers, loafing on the boardwalk, laughed. "Leave me be," Maggie said, her voice low. "Oh, I just want to ask a question." Amos lunged, grabbing her arm. His grip was brutal. "What's a man got to do to get a hot meal out at your place? Or are you exclusive?" He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. "Let me smell you. See if you smell like sulfur." Maggie cried out, a thin, sharp sound of pain and terror. Levi was coming around the corner. He saw the hand in her hair. He saw her face, white with fear. He did not shout. He did not warn. The coiled violence he had kept leashed for 20 years simply snapped. He crossed the street in 4 bounds. Amos looked up, his drunken grin fading as Levi's shadow fell over him. Levi hit him. It was one punch. It was all the pent-up rage from the war, the guilt from that morning, the fury at the town, the shame of his own cowardice. The sound was not a slap. It was a wet, heavy crack, like an axe splitting green wood. Amos Fry dropped to the boardwalk as if his strings had been cut. His nose was a red ruin, blood pumping onto the dusty planks. He was not moving. The street went dead silent. The 2 ranchers stopped laughing. Levi stood over the fallen man, his chest heaving. He was shaking, not with fear, but with an adrenaline so potent it made him dizzy. "Sheriff Brody!" someone yelled. The sheriff was out of his office in a moment. He took in the scene. Maggie, trembling, clutching her arm. Amos, unconscious and bleeding. Levi, standing like a thunderhead. "God damn it! Morgan!" Brody said, his hand on his pistol. "That's enough. You're coming with me." Levi was locked in the town's single cell. It was cold, damp, and smelled of urine and old vomit. He sat on the cot, his hands on his knees, and stared at the wall. He heard voices from the outer office. Mrs. Gable, her voice sharp as broken glass. "He's a menace, a violent animal, and she drove him to it. She's a witch, Sheriff. She's cursed this town." And then he heard Maggie. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. "That's not true." "Go on home, Miss Hensley," Sheriff Brody said, his voice weary. "This ain't your concern." "He grabbed me, Sheriff. He pulled my hair. He assaulted me." "It's Amos Fry, girl. He's a drunk, but he's harmless. Levi damn near killed him." Levi could hear the scrape of a chair. He heard Mrs. Gable sniff. "What's a woman like you got that's worth protecting anyway? A ruined old maid." There was a long, terrible silence. Levi closed his eyes. He wished they would just hang him and be done with it. Then Maggie spoke, and her voice was different. It was stripped of all pride. It was the voice of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Please, Sheriff, it was my fault. I said things. I provoked Mr. Fry. I'm not well. The fire, my family. It addled my wits. Levi, Mr. Morgan, he was just trying to stop me from making a scene. Please, don't lock him up. He's all I have." She was playing the part, the one the town had written for her. The damaged, crazy old maid. She was humiliating herself to save him. Levi put his head in his hands. Another long silence. Then Brody sighed. The sound was heavy. "Fine, I'll let him go. But you, Morgan," he yelled toward the cell. "You owe her. She just ate dirt for you. You get out of my town and you control yourself. Next time, I don't care what Amos did. You'll hang." The cell door creaked open. The ride back to the ranch was a new kind of hell. The silence was a living, vibrating thing, filled with rage and shame. They got inside the cabin. Levi threw his hat onto the table. He turned to face her, to say, he did not know what, to thank her, to apologize. Before he could speak, she slapped him. Her palm cracked across his face, the force of it stinging his eyes. He stared at her, stunned. "Don't you ever," she whispered, her voice shaking with a fury that terrified him, "ever do that again." "Maggie, he put his hands on you." "And you made it worse. You made me a spectacle. You turned me into a whore they could fight over in the street." "I was protecting you." "You were not. You were protecting your pride. You can't stand to look at me in the daylight. You can't speak to me. You hide in the barn like a coward because you're ashamed of what you did. But you'll break a man's nose for me. You only want me when it's convenient. Levi, you want me in the dark, when no one is looking, and you want me in the street, when it makes you feel like a man. But you don't want me. You're ashamed of me." The truth of her words hit him harder than her hand. He had no defense, so he attacked. "Ashamed?" he roared, the violence still thrumming in his veins. "I'm not the one hiding. You've been hiding since the day you got here. You hide behind that damn mending. And you hide behind the stove. And you hide behind your silence. You want me to see you, then be seen. You hide from the world. You hide from yourself. You're so afraid of being hurt again that you'd rather be a ghost." They stood inches apart, breathing hard, their words hanging in the air like poison. They had said the unforgivable. They had spoken the truth. Maggie's face crumpled. She turned, walked into her room, and shut the door. He was left alone with the echo of his own cruelty. They did not speak for 3 days. It was worse than any silence before. It was a suffocating, dead thing. They were 2 stones in a box. On the 3rd night, Levi could not take it. The guilt of Kansas, the shame of his avoidance, the fury of the fight, the truth of her accusations. He was poison. He was a monster. He had broken the one good thing that had ever happened to him. He went to the small cupboard. He took out the bottle of whiskey. He drank. He drank to kill the man who had run from Kansas. He drank to kill the coward who had avoided her in the morning. He drank to kill the animal who had beaten Amos Fry. He drank until the cabin spun, until the firelight blurred, until the nightmares retreated, chased away by the burn. He needed air. He stumbled outside. The night air was cold, damp with the thaw. He saw the wood pile, the axe resting against it. He would chop wood. He would be useful. He grabbed the axe, his motions clumsy. Drunk. He swung. He missed the log entirely. The force of the swing spun him around. He tripped over his own feet, falling backward, hard. His head cracked against the frozen, sharp edge of the chopping block. A flash of white-hot pain, and then nothing. Maggie heard the silence. The pacing had stopped. The angry muttering. She had been lying in her bed, fully clothed, starving but too proud to come out. The silence was too deep. She opened her door. The cabin was empty. The whiskey bottle was on the table, empty. The main door was open, letting in the cold. She ran outside. She found him, a dark heap by the wood pile. He was unconscious, his face slack, blood matted his hair, dark and sticky in the moonlight. His hand was torn open, bleeding freely onto the snow. She looked at him, at this broken, violent, self-loathing man, and she felt tired, just so tired. But she was not the girl who ran. She was not the woman who froze. She put her arms under his and dragged him. He was a dead weight. She grunted, her heels digging into the mud, and pulled him, inch by inch, back inside. She got him onto his cot. She lit the lamp. The cut on his temple was deep, bleeding sluggishly. His hand was a mess. She went to work. She washed the blood from his face, her touch methodical. She stitched the gash on his head with her mending needle and thread, her hands steady. She cleaned and bandaged his torn hand. He woke hours later. The cabin was dark, save for the low fire. His head felt like it had been split in two. He groaned and saw her, a silhouette in the rocking chair, watching him. The shame was absolute. He could not even look at her. "Go," he rasped. His throat was raw. "Just go, Maggie. I'm poison. I'll only hurt you. Leave me." She was quiet for a long time. She walked over to the cot and stood over him. He looked away. "I'm staying," she said. Her voice was flat, without anger, without pity. It was just a fact. "Even if you don't want me." He turned, looking up at her. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the new lines around her eyes, and the strength, a strength he had never possessed. That night, the fever took him. He thrashed, caught in the nightmares. He was back at Shiloh, the cannon smoke thick in his throat. He called out, not for his mother, but for his brother. "Silas, don't!" He felt a cool cloth on his forehead. He felt a hand, small and rough, grip his... He opened his eyes. She was there, her face blurred in the darkness. He gripped her hand, his fingers desperate. "Don't leave me! Don't leave me alone!" She did not speak. She eased onto the cot, lying on top of the blankets, her back to him. She pulled his arm over her, holding his bandaged hand against her own chest. She was an anchor, solid and real and there. He pressed his face into her back, inhaling the scent of her, and for the first time in his adult life, he slept without dreaming. When he woke, the fever had broken. He was clear-headed. She was still beside him, asleep, her body warm. He watched her breathe. He saw the strength that he had mistaken for hiding. He saw the pride he had mistaken for stubbornness. He moved his hand. Gently, he touched her hair. She woke, turning to face him. Her gray eyes were clear. He did not speak. He did not need to. He leaned in, his body weak, his head aching. He kissed her. It was not hungry. It was not guilty. It was slow. It was tender. His lips were trembling. It was not a taking. It was a question. "May I?" She kissed him back. It was not a surrender. It was an answer. Yes. He made love to her, this time with a reverence that bordered on pain. It was not about need. It was about seeing. It was about touching the scars on her spirit and letting her touch his. Later, as they lay tangled in the blankets, the sun finally rising, he heard a sound. A steady, constant dripping. He looked past her, to the window. The icicles that had hung from the eaves for months were weeping. The snow had pulled back from the cabin walls, revealing the dark, wet earth. The thaw had come, but the sound brought no relief. It meant the roads were open. It meant the world they had hidden from could reach them. And he knew, with a sudden, cold certainty, that Amos Fry had friends, and the town's judgment was not yet finished. Danger was coming. The thaw did not bring peace. It brought mud. The world was a sucking, brown soup, and the ranch felt exposed. The white blanket of snow ripped away, revealing the vulnerable earth beneath. They heard the horses before they saw them. It was not the sound of a single rider. It was the heavy, rhythmic sucking of many hooves pulling free of the mud. Levi was in the barn, reinforcing the door Amos Fry had nearly broken. He went still. His eyes met Maggie's across the yard, where she was hanging laundry on a line. A brave, futile act against the damp, gray air. She dropped a wet shirt into the basket. He walked calmly back to the cabin. Not running, his movements measured. Maggie followed him inside. "Stay away from the window," he said. He took his Winchester rifle from the rack above the door. He checked the action, slotted a cartridge into the chamber, and moved to the window, standing just to the side of the glass. They came out of the pines, 6 of them. Levi recognized them all. Mayor Thompson was in the lead, sitting his horse uneasily, trying to look official. Beside him was Amos Fry, his face a grotesque mask of purple and yellow, his nose splinted and bandaged. The other 4 were ranchers, men Levi had seen at the mercantile, men whose faces were now set in a kind of righteous, sullen anger. They stopped just outside the muddy yard, a safe distance from the cabin. "Levi Morgan," Thompson called out, his voice thin in the damp air. "We've come to talk." "I'm listening," Levi called back, his voice flat. The rifle was heavy and solid in his hands. "This situation, it has become a matter of public concern." Thompson adjusted his spectacles, pulling a piece of paper from his coat. "The town council held a meeting. We are concerned about you, Levi, and about the moral character of this county." "My morals ain't your business, Mayor." "They are when they affect the community." It was Amos Fry who shouted, his voice thick from his broken nose. "He's living in sin with that Hensley witch. She's addled him. He beat me half to death, unprovoked." "She's a curse, Levi," another man yelled. "Her family burned out, and now she's brought her bad luck to you." "We're worried she's taken advantage of you, Morgan," Thompson cut in, trying to regain control. "Given your solitary nature, we believe you are not in your right mind. The council has passed a motion. We are prepared to take Miss Hensley into protective custody and to place this land under guardianship, pending a review of your mental fitness." It was a land grab, a pious, legal, greasy land grab. They wanted his ranch, and they were using Maggie as the key. "You're not taking her," Levi said, "and you're not setting foot on my land. Ride out." "Now, Levi, be reasonable," Thompson said, holding up a placating hand. "We have the law on our side, moral concern. It's a valid charge in this territory." "He's bewitched," Amos roared, his face mottling with rage. He pulled his pistol from its holster. "Let's just burn her out, like her kin." Levi moved. He raised the Winchester to his shoulder, aimed, and fired. The shot was deafening. It was not aimed at a man. It was aimed at Amos's horse. The bullet cracked through the air and struck the pommel of Amos's saddle, whining as it ricocheted, sending splinters of wood into the man's thigh. The horse screamed, rearing, bucking in the thick mud. Amos yelled, dropping his pistol as he fought to stay mounted. The other horses shied, dancing nervously. "The next one," Levi called, his voice now a low, deadly promise. "Goes through the man, not the saddle. Get off my land." Mayor Thompson was pale, his hands shaking. He looked at Levi's face in the window, a cold, impassive shadow behind the glass. He looked at Amos, who was fighting his panicked horse, and at the other men, whose bravado had vanished at the sound of the shot. "This isn't over. Morgan," Thompson stammered. "You've made a threat, an unlawful threat against us." "I made a promise," Levi said. "Ride." Thompson pulled his horse around, digging his heels in. The others followed. A disorderly, muddy retreat. Amos was last, his horse still trembling, casting one look of pure, murderous hatred back at the cabin. Levi watched them until they disappeared into the trees. He lowered the rifle. He let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned. Maggie was pressed against the far wall, her hands over her mouth. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "They're gone," he said. "They'll be back," she whispered. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the door, as if she could see the men through the wood. She was seeing something else. "That look in their eyes, I've seen it before." "It was just talk. Maggie—" "No," she said, her voice dropping. "It was the look of men who believe they are doing God's work. It's a lynching look. Levi, they won't come back with talk next time. They'll come back with rope and with fire." She sank onto the small bench by the door, her head in her hands. The dread in the room was a physical thing, a cold fog that the fire in the stove could not burn away. That night, neither of them could sleep. The silence from the muddy world outside was worse than the sound of the storm. It was an expectant hush. Levi sat at the table, methodically cleaning the Winchester, breaking it down, oiling every piece, his hands steady. It was a ritual, a way to focus his mind. Maggie sat in the rocking chair, her mending basket in her lap, but she was not sewing. She was just staring at the flames in the stove. "They're right, you know," she said, her voice so quiet he barely heard it. He stopped cleaning. "What?" "About me. I'm tainted. I'm not what you think I am." "Maggie, that's town gossip. That's Mrs. Gable's poison." "No." She turned to look at him, her face in the firelight a mask of old, settled grief. "I have to. If they come back, you have to know what you're protecting." "I'm protecting you. I don't care about the rest." "You will," she whispered. She took a breath, a ragged, painful thing. "The war, it wasn't just hard. After my father lost his farm in Illinois, before we came west, we were destitute. We were following the army, trying to get to a relocation camp in Missouri." She stopped, her hands twisting in her lap. "We were starving. Levi, my brothers, my father, they were sick. There was a captain of the Union cavalry. He had food. He had blankets. He offered us protection, safe passage." Levi put the rifle barrel down on the table. He knew this story. He had seen it a dozen times during the war. "He wanted a price," Maggie continued, her voice dead. "He wanted me for company in his tent. My father looked away. He let him take me." Levi's hands clenched into fists. "Maggie, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She stood, walking to the fire, kneading the heat. "I went for 2 weeks. I was his, to keep my family from starving, to keep them safe from bushwhackers. I sold myself, Levi, for salt pork and a canvas roof. I was 16 years old." Levi felt the blood drain from his face. 16. "When he was done," she said. when his troop moved on. He left us, just left us by the side of a road. My family, they never spoke of it. They never looked at me the same way again. That's when I became a ghost. That's when I became the old maid. I was ruined. I was the price they paid to survive, and they hated me for it. She was crying now, silent, terrible tears that tracked down her face. I wanted you to know. The woman you're protecting, the woman you touched, she's a whore, a 16-year-old whore. Levi stood. He walked to her. He did not touch her. He just stood in front of her, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. "What was his name?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why?" "His name, Maggie." "Wallace," she whispered. "Captain Thomas Wallace, 3rd Cavalry." Levi closed his eyes. He remembered Wallace, a thick-necked, brutal man from Chicago who drank heavily and treated his men like cattle. A man Levi had despised. A cold fury, 20 years old, rose in his gorge. He wanted to kill a dead man. He opened his eyes. He looked at Maggie, at this woman who had burned her own life down to keep her family warm. He was shaken, but not by revulsion. He was shaken by the sheer, terrible strength of her. She had done what she had to do. She had survived. "He didn't ruin you, Maggie," he said, his voice raw. "He just showed you what hell looked like." She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with shame. "And you? What do you see when you look at me now?" He reached out and, with a rough thumb, wiped a tear from her cheek. "I see the survivor." And then he broke. The confession, the confrontation, the sheer weight of the last 20 years. It was too much. He turned away from her, braced his hands against the cabin wall, and his shoulders began to shake. You survived," he choked out. I just broke things." She came up behind him, her hand hesitant on his back. "Levi, what?" "The war," he said, the words torn from him. "You think I'm some hero. I'm not. I'm a butcher. I executed a boy for desertion." He turned to face her, his own face twisted in a shame that matched hers. "He wasn't but 16, same as you. From Tennessee, he got a letter his ma was dying, and he just walked off. They caught him. They made an example, and I was officer of the day. I had to give the order. I had to watch." He sank onto the bench, his head in his hands. He was crying, Maggie, just a kid. He was crying for his ma, and I buttoned my coat, and I gave the order. I killed him. I killed him for being scared. And you saved your family. God, who's the sinner here?" She did not speak. She sat beside him. She took his large, calloused, scarred hand in both of her small, rough ones. She did not say it was okay. She did not say he was forgiven. She just held on. They sat there for a long time, the fire burning low, two sinners clinging to each other in the dark, their shared shame a strange, painful, and unbreakable bond. The sun rose on a new world. The dread was still there, but the shame between them was gone, burned away by the confessions. Levi was cleaning his rifle again. It was mid-morning. "Marry me," he said. Maggie, who was stirring oatmeal at the stove, froze. "What?" "Marry me." He didn't look up from the rifle. "We ride to town. We see Pastor Allen. We make it legal." She turned, her face pale. "Why?" "Why?" He finally looked at her. "Because Thompson and his friends, they see you as my whore, as my property. They think they can take you and take this land because I'm addled, and you're nothing. If you're my wife, they can't. It's a shield. It gives them one less stone to throw." Her face hardened. She turned back to the stove. "No." "No? I told you, Levi, I will not be your penance, and I will not be your shield. I won't marry you to save your reputation. Or your land. He stood, slamming the rifle down on the table. Damn my reputation, and damn the land. He strode over to her, grabbing her arm, turning her to face him. Did you not hear me last night? Do you not see? It's not about the land. It's not about the town. It's... I need you, here, beside me. He was shouting, but it was a shout of desperation, not anger. I lived in that hole for 20 years, he said, his voice breaking. That nightmare, alone, and then you came, and you were in here, with me, and the nightmares, they eased. You're the anchor, Maggie. You're the only thing that's held me to this earth. I'm not asking you to be my shield. I'm asking you to save my life, because without you, I think I'll just drift away. She stared at him, her gray eyes searching his. She saw no pity, no guilt, only a raw, desperate, and terrifying need. You don't owe me, she whispered, one last protest. I know, he said. This isn't owing, this is wanting. Marry me, Maggie. She nodded. Once, a small, jerky movement. Yes. They rode to town that afternoon. They did not take the wagon. They rode. Levi on his mare, Maggie on the workhorse. Side by side. The town watched them come. Whispers followed them up the muddy street to the church. Pastor Allen met them on the steps, his face a cold, pious mask. Mr. Morgan, Miss Hensley, what can I do for you? We're here to be married, Pastor, Levi said, his hand on Maggie's back. Pastor Allen's face hardened. That is not possible. Why not? We're of age. We're free. It is not appropriate, the pastor said, his gaze sliding past Maggie. There are concerns. The town is in an uproar. Amos Fry is gravely injured. There are accusations of witchcraft, of coercion. As a man of God, I cannot, in good conscience, join you in holy matrimony when your household is under such a dark cloud. It would be a sacrilege. So you'll listen to gossip over God's law? Levi's voice was dangerously low. I am listening to the heart of my community. They are frightened. And frankly, Mr. Morgan, I will not sanctify. This, not until you have cleared your name. And this woman has proven her repentance. Repentance for what? Maggie asked, her voice clear. For being homeless? For being unmarried? For your pride, Miss Hensley. For living in sin and flaunting it. I will pray for your souls. He turned and went back inside the church, shutting the heavy oak door behind him. Levi stared at the closed door, his body vibrating with the urge to kick it down. Levi, Maggie said, touching his arm. It's all right. Let's go home. He looked at her. She was not angry. She was calm, defeated, but calm. He nodded. Home. They rode back in silence. But when they got to the ranch, Levi did not unsaddle the horses. He went to the shed and got his axe. He walked to the edge of the tree line, to a small clearing that looked out over the valley. He found 2 young, straight aspen trees. He cut them down. He worked all the next day. He stripped the white bark. He dug post holes in the damp earth. He built an arch, a simple, pale, beautiful arch, stark against the dark pines and the brown mud. On the 3rd day, the sun came out, a weak, watery light. The air was warmer. Go put on your best dress, he said. She looked at him, then at the arch. She nodded. She came out of the cabin an hour later. She wore the one other dress she owned, a dark blue calico, patched but clean. She had washed her hair and left it down, tied back with a simple ribbon. She looked beautiful. He was waiting for her, dressed in his own clean, worn shirt. He held out his hand. She took it. They walked together, through the mud, to the clearing. They stood under the white arch. There was no pastor, no Bible, no rings. There was just the wind in the pines and the sound of the melting snow. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "I, Levi Morgan," he said, his voice thick, "take you, Margaret Hensley, to be my wife, to hold on to in the dark and in the light. I'll stand by you. I swear it." Tears streamed down her face. She smiled. "I, Margaret Hensley, take you, Levi Morgan, to be my husband. I will be your anchor. I will share your home, and your name, and your pain. I will not leave you. I swear it." He leaned in to kiss her, to seal it. "And Levi Morgan." The shout shattered the moment. They both turned. Sheriff Brody was riding into the yard, followed by Mayor Thompson and 2 deputies Levy didn't know. "Levi Morgan," Brody called again. Dismounting, he walked toward them, his hand on his gun. He held a piece of paper. "I have a warrant for your arrest." Levi instinctively stepped in front of Maggie. "A warrant for what?" "Assault with intent to harm against Amos Fry, and unlawful threats of violence against the town council." Brody stopped 10 feet away. "You've got to come with me." Levi, quietly. "You can't," Maggie said, her voice shaking. We were just—" "It's the law, miss," Brody said, his eyes hard. He looked at Thompson, who was smiling, a thin, satisfied smirk. "He's lying," Levi said. "This is a land grab." "You can tell that to the judge in Helena," Brody said. "Now, put your hands up. Levi, don't make this hard." Levi looked at Maggie. He saw her face. The brief moment of joy shattered. He saw the trap closing. They had him. "It's all right, Maggie," he said, his voice soft. He started to raise his hands. "No." Maggie stepped out from behind him. She moved, her skirts dragging in the mud, and stood directly between Levi and the sheriff's pistol. She was small and thin, and she was trembling, but her eyes were not afraid. They were burning. "No," she said again, her voice ringing out in the clearing. "Miss Hensley, step aside," Brody warned. "This is official business." "He is my husband," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We just got married, and you will not take him." "Maggie, move," Levi said, trying to push her. She locked her arm back, holding her ground. She looked at Sheriff Brody. "If you take him," she said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce promise, "you will have to take me too." Sheriff Brody looked at the woman in front of him, this thin, mud-streaked creature who dared to stand in the way of his pistol. He saw her ragged breathing, the defiant terror in her eyes. He was not a cruel man, but he was a tired one, and he had a warrant. "Ma'am, I gave you a warning," Brody said, his voice flat. "That's obstruction. Now, step aside, or I'm taking you in too." "Then take me," she whispered. "Maggie, no!" Levi's voice was a low command. He put his hands on her shoulders, gently but firmly moving her aside. She looked at him, her eyes wide with betrayal. "You're giving up?" He met her gaze. "This isn't the fight." His look said, "Not here, not now." He turned to Brody and slowly, deliberately, raised his hands. "All right, Sheriff, no trouble." The deputies moved in, their relief visible. They were quick, snapping the cold iron cuffs onto his wrists, the click echoing in the clearing. Mayor Thompson watched, his face a mask of smug, civic concern. "You're doing the right thing, Levi," Thompson said. Levi just stared at him, a look so cold and flat that the mayor took an involuntary step back. They led him to the horses. He did not look back at Maggie. He could not bear to see her standing alone by the pale, useless arch they had built, her wedding vows still cooling on the air. The ride to town was a blur of mud and humiliation. The walk to the cell was worse. The town was buzzing. It was as if every curtain, every door, held a pair of watching eyes. He was a spectacle. The monster, finally caged. Brody shoved him into the single cell and slammed the barred door. The sound was final. "The judge will be here from Helena in 2 weeks, maybe 3, Brody said, hanging the keys on the hook. "You sit tight. Don't cause trouble." Levi did not respond. He just walked to the narrow cot, sat down, and stared at the damp stone wall. The cold set in first. The thaw had made the jailhouse damp, a bone-chilling wet that crept into his joints. But the cold was nothing compared to the sound. The town was alive with talk. His cell window faced the boardwalk, and he heard it all. "Heard she bewitched him." Mrs. Gable's sharp voice cut through the air. "Plain and simple. He was a quiet man, kept to himself. Then she arrives, and in 3 months, he's a violent madman. It's unnatural." "Amos Fry says she invited him." Another voice, one of the ranchers, added, low and greasy, "teased him, like, and when he turned her down, she sicked Morgan on him, like a dog." "It's the curse," a third voice whispered. "The Hensley curse. First the fire, now this. She's poisoned him." They found that altar he built her, out by the trees. Pastor Allen says it's pagan, a witch's altar. They were twisting it, twisting their ceremony, their vows into something dark and ugly. Levi closed his eyes. He felt the rage build, a hot, familiar poison. But beneath it was a colder, deeper dread. He had not protected her. He had pulled her into his own darkness, and now the town was tearing her apart. He sat in the dark. He thought of the war. He thought of the years he had spent alone on the ranch, building his walls, nursing his guilt. He had told himself it was penance, for his brother, for the boy he'd executed. He saw the truth now. It was not penance. It was cowardice. He had loved her. He had loved her 10 years ago, in that barn in Kansas. The force of it, the shocking, terrifying life he felt when he was with her, had scared him more than any cannonade. He had run from it. He had called it sin and guilt, because those were familiar, heavy blankets. Love was a blade. He had run from her then, and he had failed her now. He had let his pride, his violence, and his fear of the town's judgment trap them both. He sat in the cold cell, a free man in his soul for the first time, and a prisoner in body. And he remembered every woman he had ever turned away from, every polite smile he had refused, every chance at a life he had sabotaged. He had not been waiting for a wife. He had been waiting for her. And now, it was too late. Maggie did not go home. She stood by the arch until the deputies were long gone, the sky turning a bruised purple. Then she walked to the horses, her wedding dress spattered with mud, and rode back to town. She was not the ghost. She was not the victim. She was a wife. She went to the sheriff's office first. Brody was filling out paperwork by the light of a kerosene lamp. "Sheriff," she said. He looked up, surprised by her presence. Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice not unkind. "There's nothing you can do. Go on home." "It was a lie," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Amos Fry assaulted me. Mayor Thompson and his men threatened us. They want his land. You know they do." Brody sighed, putting his pen down. "Ma'am, I know there's bad blood. I know Thompson is a greedy man. But I have 6 sworn statements. 6, all saying Levi threatened to kill them, all saying he attacked Amos without provocation. What do I have from you? Your word. It's not enough to stop a warrant. So you'll just let them railroad him? You'll let them steal his land?" "I will let the judge sort it out," Brody said, his voice firming. "That's the law. Now, please, go home." She stared at him, at his badge, at the comfortable, safe walls of his office. He was not an evil man. He was just a weak one, a man who followed the path of least resistance. She left. She crossed the muddy street to the church. The building was dark, but a light glowed in the rectory. Pastor Allen answered the door, his nightshirt tucked into his trousers.
Mrs. Morgan, this is highly irregular.
I need your help, Pastor, she said, bypassing any greeting. The town is lying. They're persecuting my husband. You are a man of God. You must speak the truth. Pastor Allen's face settled into lines of pious disappointment. My child, I spoke the truth this afternoon when I refused to bless your union. This violence, this arrest, this is the consequence of your sin. You and Mr. Morgan chose to live in defiance of God's law. How can you now ask for God's protection? So you'll do nothing? You'll stand by and watch a good man be destroyed by liars. I will pray for his soul, the pastor said stiffly, and for yours. I suggest you pray for repentance, not release. He closed the door in her face. The cold of the night seeped into her. She was alone. Every institution, law, and God had shut its door to her. She had one stop left. She walked to the mercantile. A light was on upstairs. She hammered on the door. Mayor Thompson opened it, his waistcoat unbuttoned. He scowled when he saw her. What is the meaning of this?
Let him go,
she said. I've already told you. Mrs. Morgan, he said, the name a sneer on his lips. It is out of my hands. The law. Do not speak to me of the law. She cut him off, her voice low and shaking with a fury that stunned him into silence. I know what you did to my father. Thompson's face did not change, but his eyes went still. Very still. Silas Hensley, Maggie said, stepping closer, forcing him back into his own store. He owned the South Quarter, the one with the creek, the one you just sold to the railroad for the new depot. Your father was a failed homesteader. He abandoned his claim. He bought his claim, Maggie hissed. He bought it from Ebenezer Morgan, Levi's father, and he wouldn't sell it to you, would he? He was a stubborn man, so you and your friends, you burned him out. You set fire to his barn, and when he and my brothers ran out to fight it, you murdered them. This is madness, slander. You have no proof. Thompson was trying to bluster, but a fine sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. Don't I? Maggie said. You covered it up, you and Brody, and Pastor Allen. You filed his land as abandoned. 3 days after the fire, you stole it. You're a thief and a murderer. Get out of my store, you lunatic! I will go straight from here to the telegraph office, Maggie said, her voice rising. I will send a wire to the territorial governor. I will send one to the U.S. Marshals in Helena. I will tell them how the mayor of Delmore murders families for railroad money. I have nothing to lose. Mr. Thompson, my name is already ruined. My family is dead, but I will enjoy watching this town die. I will enjoy watching them hang you. Thompson stared at her. He saw no bluff. He saw a woman who had been pushed past her limit, a woman who was perfectly willing to burn the world down. What do you want? He whispered. Levi, released, all charges dropped, and you will find a way. She left him there, in the dark, surrounded by his stolen goods. She rode back to the ranch. The cabin was cold, the fire in the hearth long dead. It felt empty, a shell. She knew her threat was good, but it might not be enough. She needed proof. She went to Levi's desk. Ledgers, receipts, nothing. Then she saw it, the cedar chest, the one he had built for a wife, the one he had put his past into. Her hands trembled as she opened it. His mother's Bible, a tintype of a young man with Levi's eyes. His brother, Silas, a service pistol, heavy and cold, and at the bottom, a tin box. She opened it. Land deeds, his father's name, Ebenezer Morgan, and another paper, folded and yellowed. A bill of sale, dated 1872, signed by Ebenezer Morgan and Silas Hensley, for the South Quarter, for the sum of $200, paid in full. Her father hadn't just bought it. He had bought it from Levi's father. She held the paper, the proof. The proof that her father was not a failure. The proof that Thompson was a thief and a murderer. She had it. She rode back to town at dawn. She did not bother to wash. She was a fury in a mud-stained dress. She found Thompson in the mercantile, his eyes red-rimmed. He hadn't slept. She slapped the deed on the counter. He read it. His face, which had been pale, turned the color of wet ash. This is a copy," he stammered.
This is the original,
Maggie said, her voice dead.
This is the paper that hangs you.
He stared at it, his breathing shallow. He looked at her. "What do you want?"
I told you, Levi.
"And the land? The money? Your justice?" Maggie looked at the paper. It was her father's life, his vindication. It was the truth. And she looked toward the jail. Levi was alive.
My father is dead,
she said, her voice breaking.
I can't save him. I choose the living.
She pushed the deed across the counter.
This for him?
Thompson stared at her, uncomprehending. You'll give me this? You'll stay silent? I will trade my father's ghost for my husband's life. Burn it, forget it. But you let him go. Now. Thompson's hand trembled as he reached for the deed. He looked at her, at this strange, fierce woman. He had built his life on greed. He did not understand sacrifice, but he understood leverage. It will be done, he said. Levi heard the key in the lock. He looked up. Sheriff Brody was opening the cell door. Get up, Morgan. You're free to go. Levi stood, suspicious. Just like that. Just like that. Amos Fry. He woke up this morning with a clear head, recanted his whole testimony, said he was drunk, said he tripped over his own feet and you were just helping him. The mayor and the others. They backed him. Said it was all a misunderstanding. Said you were just distraught. It was the thinnest, most pathetic lie Levi had ever heard. He walked out of the cell. He walked out into the main office. Maggie was there, standing by the door, her back to him. She was holding the reins of their horses. He walked out onto the boardwalk. The sun was watery. He stopped in front of her. What did you do, Maggie? He asked. She turned. Her face was exhausted. She looked like she had aged 10 years.
I made a trade,
she said, her voice hollow.
What trade? What did you pay?
She met his eyes, and he saw the shame, the sacrifice, the terrible, terrible cost. My father's ghost. I traded my father's ghost for you. He did not need to ask more. He understood. She had given up justice for her family to save him. They rode back to the ranch in a new, heavy silence. The world felt wrong. The air was too thin. They reached the cabin. He unhitched the horses, his movements automatic. He followed her inside. She did not take off her coat. She stood in the middle of the cold room and looked around. I have to pack my bag, she said. Levi, who was reaching for the kindling box, froze. Pack? What are you? We're home. Maggie.
No.
Her voice was flat, dead. She would not look at him. I'm leaving. I'll take the workhorse. I'll ride south, to Wyoming. I don't know. Leaving? He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing her arm.
What are you talking about? We're married. I'm free.
Are you? She finally looked at him, and her eyes were drowning in a shame that was all for him. Don't you see? Levi, this is worse. I'm not just the town witch anymore. I'm the woman who blackmailed the town. I'm the woman who owns the mayor. They'll never stop hating me, and they'll hate you for being with me. I don't care if they hate me, he roared. But I care, she cried, her voice finally breaking. I care. I let them get away with it. I traded my father's murder for you, all those years, all that pain, for this, and every time you look at me, you'll see the price. You'll see the shame.
I can't live with that look. I can't be your sin anymore. Levi, I can't.
She tried to pull away, to go to the bedroom.
Don't,
He begged, his voice cracking. He held on to her.
don't leave me. I love you. Maggie.
Love? She laughed, a bitter, broken sound.
This isn't love. This is a debt. This is two broken things clinging to each other in the dark. It's not enough. It's just more shame. It's not clean.
She pulled free and went into the bedroom. He heard her pull the carpet bag. He followed her, standing in the doorway.
Then what?
He demanded, his voice raw. What is enough? You want to run? Where? Back to being a ghost? She turned, her bag in her hand, her face tracked with tears, her eyes burning.
I want a life. Levi. Not this hiding. Not this ranch, built for a woman who never came. Not this town full of murderers. I want clean. I want new.
She stepped up to him, her hands fisted at her sides.
Do you love me?
She asked, her voice low and dangerous. I just told you, yes. Then prove it. This place, this ranch, it's your guilt. It's your brother's ghost. It's the war. It's your prison. I just traded my father's ghost for you. Are you willing to trade yours? What are you saying? She looked him dead in the eye. Do you love me enough to burn this place down and start over? He stared at her. The question was madness. This ranch was all he had. It was the only thing he had built, the only thing he had saved. He looked past her, at the empty cabin, the cold hearth, the cot he had spent a decade of nightmares on, the chair where he sat alone. It was a prison. She was right. He did not speak. He turned and walked out of the bedroom, into the main room. He walked to the hearth. He knelt. He took the kindling. He laid the logs. He struck a match and lit the fire. Maggie watched him. Her breath caught in her throat. He did not stop at a small fire. He added another log, and another. He built it high, a roaring, defiant blaze that pushed back the damp, the cold, the ghosts. The flames roared in the chimney. He stood. He turned to face her. The firelight danced in his eyes. The whole cabin, the whole ranch, seemed to watch the hearth glow, the shadows retreating to the corners. He walked to her. He did not speak. He did not have to. He bent and slid his arms under her, lifting her from the floor. She was light, her carpet bag dropping from her hand. Her arms went around his neck, her hands tangling in his hair. He carried her. He did not carry her out the door. He carried her across the main room, past the roaring fire, and into the bedroom. The one that had stood empty for 6 years. The one that had been meant for a wife who never came. He laid her gently on the bed. They did not speak. There were no words for this. The glow from the hearth fire filled the doorway, casting the room in warm, moving shadows. He lay down beside her, on top of the blankets. He was trembling. He reached out, his hand rough, calloused, scarred. He touched her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping. She covered his hand with her own. It was not a touch of passion. It was desperate. It was soft. It was the touch of two survivors in a room that was finally, truly warm. They did not sleep. They lay beside each other in the dark. The roar of the hearth fire a third presence in the room. It was not the low, sullen fire of survival. It was a hungry, cleansing blaze. Levi had fed it half his wood pile. It was the fire of a man burning down his own prison. He did not burn the cabin. He did not need to. The question had not been literal. The ranch was not the wood and nails. It was the guilt. It was the 20 years of solitude. The ghost of his brother. The memory of the boy he had executed. That was the prison. And in that moment, holding her, he had walked out of the cell. When the sun rose, the fire was a deep, pulsing bed of coals. The air in the cabin was warm, thick with the smell of pine smoke. They moved in silence. a shared, unspoken purpose between them. There was no discussion. The decision had been made. Maggie packed her small carpet bag. She folded the blue calico dress, the one she had worn for their wedding, and placed it on top. Levi went to his desk. He took the tin box. He removed the tintype of his brother, Silas. He took his mother's Bible. He left the pistol. He left the deeds. He left everything else. He went to the barn. He was methodical. He loaded the light wagon with 2 sacks of flour, a side of bacon, salt, coffee, his axe, his rifle, and a box of ammunition. He took the tools he would need, the auger, the saw, the hammer. He packed bedrolls, blankets, and their meager kitchen supplies. He saddled both horses, his bay mare, the one with the spirit, the one he trusted, and the steady workhorse. When he was done, he stood in the barn and looked at the empty stalls. He let his cattle out, slapping the last one on the rump, sending it running toward the high pasture. They would be fine. He came back to the cabin. Maggie was waiting on the porch, her bag at her feet. "It's done," he said. She nodded. She looked back into the dark cabin. At the glowing hearth, she felt a strange pang, leaving the place that had been her first prison and her first sanctuary. Levi walked past her, to the bay mare. He took his knife from his belt, the same knife he had used to cut her frozen clothes from her body. He turned to the saddle, to the heavy leather cantle, and he began to carve. He was not an artist, but his hands were strong. He worked the blade deep into the leather, cutting away the dark oiled surface to the pale suede beneath. He carved one word: Margaret. It was not a ring. It was not a piece of paper from a spiteful pastor. It was his name for her, burned into the one thing that would carry her away. It was a brand, a claim, a promise. He finished. He ran his thumb over the raw letters. He turned to her. He did not speak. He just gestured to the mare. It was hers. He helped her up into the saddle. He handed her the reins. She looked down at the name carved behind her, and her hand went to her mouth. He mounted the workhorse, took the wagon lead, and clicked his tongue. They rode out. They did not look back. They rode through the center of Delmore. It was just past dawn. The town was asleep. A few curtains twitched, but no one came out. The mud of the main street sucked at the horses' hooves, a final, greedy attempt to hold them, but the mud had lost its power. They passed the mercantile, its windows dark. They passed the church, its steeple a pale, judgmental spear against the gray sky. They passed the jail, its door standing open. They rode north, out of the valley, climbing into the foothills, toward the high, clean granite of the mountains. There were no goodbyes. There were no backward glances. There was just the sound of the wind picking up, the clink of the harnesses, and the steady, pulling rhythm of the hooves, carrying them away from the world that had tried to bury them. They traveled for 2 weeks. They spoke little, but the silence was different now. It was not the cold, heavy silence of the cabin. It was a wide, open silence, shared. They were moving, and the motion was a kind of healing. They followed a tributary of the Yellowstone, pushing higher, away from the established trails. Levi was looking for something he had seen years ago, a place he had camped one night while running from his past. On the 15th day, they found it. It was a high valley, shielded on 3 sides by towering peaks, a wall of aspen and pine, a river, clear and fast, cut through the meadow. The grass was knee-high, untouched by cattle, spotted with blue and yellow wildflowers. It was miles from any judgment. It was miles from anything. Levi pulled the wagon to a halt on a small rise overlooking the river. He got down from the horse. The air was thin and clean and cold. He looked at Maggie. She had slipped from the saddle, her boots sinking into the soft earth. She was staring at the mountains, her face tilted up to the vast, empty sky. "This will do," he said. She just nodded, her eyes closed. She was breathing. He built the cabin. It was not like the first one. The first one he had built with duty, a grim exercise in solitude. This one, he built with a quiet, focused reverence. He chose the logs himself, felling straight, strong pines. He notched them with a precision that surprised himself. She worked beside him. She was no longer earning her keep. She was building her home. She gathered stones from the riverbed, flat and gray, for the hearth. He mixed the mud and straw for the chinking, and she pressed it into the gaps, her hands, like his, becoming caked and cracked. They worked from sunup to sundown. They ate by the fire, their bodies aching with a good, clean exhaustion. They slept under the wagon, wrapped in their bedrolls. One night, he woke to find her sitting up, watching the stars. "What is it?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep.
"I've never seen so many,"
she whispered, her voice full of awe. "In town, the lights, you forget the sky." He sat up beside her, pulling the blanket around them both. He did not say anything. He just sat with her, and they watched the river of stars spill across the blackness. It took them a month. When it was finished, it was small, just one room, like the last, but it was different. It was tight. The hearth he built was wide and deep, and it drew perfectly. The floor was packed earth, but it was level and clean. He built a bed frame in the corner and a sturdy table from the leftover pine. The day they moved in, a light rain was falling. They brought their few possessions inside. It felt solid. "It's a good house, Levi," she said, her hand on the smooth, planed wood of the table. "It's our house," he said. The healing was slow. It was not a flood, but a quiet spring thaw. They learned to smile again. The first time, it was a shock. Levi was attempting to fish, but he was clumsy, his mind elsewhere, and he slipped on a wet rock, falling backward into the icy river. He came up sputtering, soaked and scowling, his hat floating downstream. Maggie, who had been gathering berries, saw the whole thing. A sound came out of her. It was a choked, rusty bark. He froze, staring at her. She tried to stop it. She put her hands to her mouth, but it came again, louder. It was a laugh, a real, full laugh that shook her thin frame. He stood in the river, dripping, and he felt the corners of his own mouth pull up. A rough scraping sound came from his own chest. He was laughing, too. She set down her berry bucket, walked to the riverbank, and held out her hand. He took it, and she pulled him onto the bank, both of them laughing like children. Life settled into a rhythm. It was a rhythm set by the sun and the seasons, not by the judgment of others. Maggie found her purpose in the earth. She cleared a patch of land by the river, turning the rich, black soil. She planted the few seeds they had brought, and seeds she harvested from the wild. She tended a garden. It was not the desperate, angry scrubbing of the cabin floor. This was an act of creation. She was putting down roots. She talked to the plants, coaxing them from the soil, her hands gentle. Levi watched her. He saw the tension leave her shoulders. He saw the color return to her face. His own purpose was clear. He provided, he hunted, returning with deer and rabbit. He fished. He explored the high valleys, his rifle on his shoulder, his mind quiet. And he wrote. He had brought the tin box and paper and a pencil. In the evenings, while Maggie said, he would sit at the table and write. He was writing letters to no one. He wrote to his brother, Silas. I am sorry, he wrote. I was too late. I let the war eat me, and I let it eat you. I am trying to live now. I am trying. He wrote to the boy he had executed. I did not know your name. He wrote, but I see your face. I am sorry. It was not justice. It was just orders. I hope you found your ma. He wrote to his father and his mother, and he wrote to Margaret. He wrote letters he never gave her, trying to find the words for the things that were still locked inside him. He was emptying the poison, page by page. One night in late May, a storm blew in. It was not the biting cold of the first blizzard. It was a late spring storm, wild and wet. A roaring, howling gale of wind and rain that turned to heavy, wet snow. It trapped them indoors for 3 days. The cabin was warm. The hearth was bright. They had fresh meat hanging, and jars of preserved berries. On the second night, the wind howled, a high, thin scream that sounded just like that first blizzard in Delmore. Levi looked up from the harness he was mending. Maggie looked up from her knitting. Their eyes met across the small room. They remembered the cold, the ice, the desperation, the skin-on-skin fight for life. Levi smiled, a slow, easy smile. "At least the wood box is full," he said. Maggie laughed. "The sound easy now. And I'm not planning on falling in the creek." "That's good," he said, his eyes warm. "I'm getting too old to be dragging you out." She threw a small ball of yarn at him. He caught it. The tension was gone. The storm raged outside. But inside, there was no fear. There was only safety. They were not trapped. They were sheltered. A week later, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Levi was sitting on the small porch he had built, the sun warm on his back. He was carving. He had found a piece of clear, pale aspen wood, and he was working it with his knife. He was careful, his large, rough hands moving with a surprising delicacy. Maggie came out, wiping her hands on an apron she had sewn. She watched him, the shavings falling at his feet. He was carving a small bird with its wings tucked in. "That's beautiful, Levi," she said. He did not look up, but he smiled. "It's for the top." She frowned. "The top of what?" He set the bird down and picked up the larger piece he was working on. He had already formed the rockers. He was hollowing out the main body. She saw what it was. Her breath caught in her throat. He was carving a cradle. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the wood, as if afraid to see her reaction. This was not a demand. It was not a question. It was an offering. It was a statement of hope. The hands that had killed, that had broken a man's face, were now making this. She did not speak. She stepped off the porch. She walked past him, toward her garden, which was bright with new green shoots. She stopped. She turned back to him. He was watching her now, his face uncertain, vulnerable. She laid one hand, her hand, brown from the sun and soil, on her own belly. She looked at him, her eyes clear and full of a light he had never seen before. "Maybe," she whispered. It was enough. The first truly warm night of June arrived. The air was soft, smelling of pine and damp earth and the wild roses that had begun to bloom by the river. They sat by the fire. The cabin door opened to the evening. Levi reached for the tin box. He opened it. He took out the stack of letters he had written. I wrote some things," he said, his voice rough. "While we were building, I think it's time you heard them." She put her mending down. "All right." He shuffled the papers, his hands trembling slightly. He found the one he was looking for. He cleared his throat. "To Margaret," he read. His voice was low, halting. "I have been trying to find the words. I am not a man who has words. I am a man who has actions, and my actions have been wrong for 10 years. He looked at her. She was watching him, her gaze steady. He continued, "I thought of you for 10 years. Every summer, when the sky turned dark, I'd be back in that barn. I called you my sin. I called you my guilt. I said it so many times I believed it. It was easier than the truth." "What was the truth?" she whispered. He looked down at the paper. "The truth is, I was afraid. The war. It hollowed me out. It made me a monster. And you were the first thing I had seen that was real. That was clean. And I was afraid of it. I was afraid of hope. I ran from you because I was a coward." He took a shaky breath. "I've sat in the dark for 20 years. Levi, paying penance for the things I did, for my brother, for that boy. I thought I was supposed to be alone. I thought that was my punishment. But you came, and you sat in the dark with me. You were never my sin. Margaret, you were never my guilt. You were my only mercy." He finished reading. The papers shook in his hand. Maggie was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant rush of the river. She moved from her chair. She knelt on the rug in front of him. She took the letter from his hand and set it aside. She laid her head on his chest, her ear over his heart. She felt it, beating strong and steady beneath her. "Then let's be merciful to each other," she whispered, her voice thick. "Forever." He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. He held her, and he was, for the first time in his life, completely whole. Later that night, the cabin glowed golden against the dark wall of the pines. A soft, warm light spilled from the open door. The sky was clear, but far to the east, beyond the mountains, thunder echoed, a distant, muffled memory of old storms. Inside, two silhouettes moved in the firelight. They moved slowly, without urgency, without shame. He touched her scars, the ones on her skin and the ones on her spirit. She touched his. They were two halves of a whole, two broken people made strong, joined together in the vast, quiet wilderness. He made love to her, slow and unashamed, the world outside and all its judgment forgotten. Thank you for listening to our story. I hope it touched your heart. We would love to know where you are listening from. Please drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to From Wild West so you never miss a new tale. And finally, what did you think of Levi and Maggie's journey? Share your thoughts with us in English. We read every comment.